Hunting Midnight is the story of a young Portuguese boy named John whose life is saved, physically and spiritually, by a bushman storyteller and healer named Midnight. About one-third of the way through the novel, Midnight disappears under mysterious circumstances, and John, now an adult, learns that his old friend may have been murdered or sold into slavery. John decides that he cannot go on with his life unless he discovers what happened to Midnight, so he leaves his family and makes a dangerous journey to the United States. At this point in the novel where this excerpt begins, Midnight has just arrived in Portugal, and the year is 1802. John and his mother do not like the looks of him, and they are angry that he's to stay in their home. John is 9 years old. I saw our African guest again before supper. Midnight was not terribly fond of shoes, and he left his, along with his stockings, at our door. His feet were small and highly arched, like those of an elf. At the supper table I picked at my sardines and managed, through sheer will, to eat an entire one, though I had no appetite at all. Midnight had strong but delicate hands like those of a weaver, I thought. Though he managed his knife and fork with a certain darting elegance, he used his fingertip to prompt a piece of potato onto the tines several times. Mother raised her eyebrows at these actions, storing each faux pas as ammunition. But what really bothered her was that he never said thank you. Not when he was invited to sit, when butter was passed him, or even when his wine cup was filled. To each of these gestures, he simply smiled. "My husband tells me, sir, that you are from southern Africa," Mama announced. "That is correct, madam," Midnight smiled. "It's what?" Papa took Mama's hand in his and said, "Midnight often uses two words for emphasis, May." "Is that so? Well then, where exactly are you from?" Papa laughed at her witticism, but stifled his mirth when she frowned at him. "I was born near the Hill of the Sky." "The Hill of the Sky," she repeated disdainfully, skewering a piece of potato with her fork. "And what might that place be?" "That place might be a great mountain that glows blue in the sunset." "Blue? How is it blue in the sunset, sir?" "It is very blue," he nodded eagerly, "as blue as can be." My mother narrowed her eyes and licked her tongue over her lips, as though preparing to dine on our guest. Very blue," she echoed sarcastically, "as blue as can be. Yes, it must have indeed been that." I realized her tactic was to point out the peculiarity of his remarks by repeating them. It was a clever strategy that had the opposite effect on me, since hearing his expressions a second time only convinced me that he possessed an agile and creative mind. "And how old might you be, sir?" she continued. It was then that he told us that he was the age of the wildflowers that blossomed in the year of the hailstorm over Gemsbach Valley. Unreceptive to his obvious flair for description, my mother insisted on a clearer answer. "But in years, how old?" she prompted, slamming down her fork. Midnight smiled and shook his head apologetically. Father gobbled down a steaming half potato. Fanning the burning heat from his now open mouth, he replied, "It's hard to say, my dear. His people are bushmen. They do not count their ages in years." "That's absurd," Mother said. Father wiped his mouth with his napkin. "Might I inquire how many steps it takes for you to get to your mother's house from here?" "Naturally you may, and I have no idea." "That is because you measure the distance in the minute it takes you. A bushman measures his age differently than we might like, but to him it makes all the sense in the world." "What rubbish!" she exclaimed. "Ridiculous it may be, May, but perfectly suited to his life." They frowned at each other and said nothing more. "What is a bushman?" I asked, for I had never heard that name. Father poured himself more wine. "The Bushmen were the first people to inhabit southern Africa. They are nomads and hunters, and they wander for hundreds of miles to follow the great rains across the desert, savanna, and jungle. I assure you, having seen them in action, that no swifter and more accurate hunter lives anywhere on earth. But of late they have been killed by the hundreds and dispersed by the Dutch and the English and even other Africans. Midnight's parents were killed by Dutch soldiers." Our guest continued to hang his head, plainly troubled. Tiny wrinkles like the spokes of a wheel spread on the skin from his almond-shaped eyes. "So what can you tell us of Africa, sir?" my mother said. Midnight had never sailed beyond the borders of Africa, so asking him to speak of his continent was tantamount to asking him to speak of the world itself, which is why, I believe, he gestured up toward our ceiling and said, "In the heavens are the stars who are the great and powerful hunters. They dance to bring back the sun, just as the bushman dances to bring back the moon." Opening his hands to my mother and lifting them toward her, as though presenting her with a generous gift, he added, "And then there is Mantis, who steps down from the sky to the desert." My mother was clearly taken aback by his beautiful words, to the extent that I believed he had won her over. But she cleared her throat and replied curtly, "Yes, well, that was all very pretty, I am sure, but I do not see what that has to do with Africa." "Africa is where these things are known," Midnight replied. "Africa is memory."